Hi guys, welcome to my channel. We are reading Monster High, Monster Rescue, Go Get Lagoona. My cat really loves this story, I guess, but we are reading chapter 5 and 6 today. It is going to be a longer video, so go get some snacks or something. But yeah, I'm just going to start reading now. At chapter 5. Chapter 5. Ghoul! We've got to go, Claudine shrieked as the shark approached. Draculaura was already on it. She thrust the skullet towards Claudine. The instant Claudine touched it, Draculaura uttered, "Monster High, Esca Monstrum!" Whoosh! The ghouls, soaping wet, a little dizzy, found themselves swirled on the floor of the creepateria. They were covered in big chunks of seaweed from the ocean. Dracula took one look at them and hurried away to get some towels, while Frankie and Cleo rushed to their side. "You're soaked!" Frankie cried, making sure to keep a safe distance from the pool of seawater that was spreading across the creepateria floor. "And kind of gross. What happened out there?" "A seaweed storm? Seaweed wraps are all the rage, you know," said Cleo, as she happily helped her ghoul friends to their feet. "Oh, my ghoul, you will not even believe what happened," Draculaura began. "The monster Mapalog dropped us into the shark-infested waters." Frankie and Cleo gasped, and then Cleo gave a quizzical look. What are sharks?" she asked. "Predatory sea monsters with literal hundreds of sharp, pointy teeth," answered Frankie. "More like thousands," Claudine corrected to her. "The shark was coming straight at us, too," Draculaura shivered, like it had just spotted its next meal. Cleo gave Drac a big hug and didn't even flinch when Draculaura dripped seawater all over her teal and gold tunic. "Not on my watch," she promised. "I will not permit some slimy, smelly shark of minutes, my best ghoul friend." Draculaura flashed her a grateful smile. "Thanks, Cleo," she replied. "I hate to admit it, but maybe Dad was right about the life vests and how dangerous it was out there. And everything else, too." "I heard that," Dracula said as he entered the room with a stack of thick, fluffy towels. "And you're welcome. I'm so glad that Drac and Claudine were brave enough to be recon mission," Frankie said. "If I'd been plunged into salt water like that..." Frankie's voice trailed off. "What?" Cleo whispered, her eyes wide. "Short Circuit Central," Frankie said. She pointed at the bolts on either side of her neck. "As you know, water and electricity definitely do not mix. Plus, salt water is corrosive. It could eat through my bolts in no time, which would be a huge disaster." Claudine let out a low whistle. "Does that mean you can't help us rescue Lagoona?" Draculaura held her breath. Claudine had said what they were all thinking, but Draculaura wasn't sure she was ready for the answer. "I don't know," Frankie replied thoughtfully. "I can tell you this, though. I won't go on the mission if there's even a chance I would put you ghouls in danger. Hopefully it's just a piece of puzzle we haven't solved yet." "There are a lot of pieces to this puzzle," Cleo grumbled. "Corrosive water, ghoul-eating sharks, and a demented Mapalog that throws us right into the middle of them. Can we get a do-over?" Draculaura shook her head. "I don't think it works like that," she said. "I don't know exactly how the monster Mapalog decides where to send us, but I have a feeling it takes us right where we need to go, whether we know it or not." "True," Frankie agreed. "I mean, we thought we were in the middle of an empty desert when we set off to rescue you, Cleo, but it turns out we were really close to your tomb. We just didn't know it at all at the time," added Claudine. "So that gets us back to what we were talking about earlier," Draculaura said. All the things we don't know about how to rescue Lagoona, like how to get Frankie there safely and avoid being eaten by a giant shark, said Claudine. And maybe not get dunked in the middle of some faraway ocean, Cleo said hopefully. I mean, as much as I love a free organic seaweed wrap, the ocean doesn't sound like my thing, ghouls. We can do this, Draculaura said with a rush of confidence. She flung her arms out wide. I mean, look at this. We have all the Monster High available to us. We can learn anything here, which means we can do anything out there, Frankie said, pointing at the window. I still haven't heard back from Lagoona, Draculaura said as she reached for her phone. I'm going to send a message to check in. Drac's pale fingers flew across the screen as she typed each letter. Hey, Ghoul, it's Drac. I took a quick trip to your area. Did you see me? Not sure exactly where I was. We were surrounded by water and there was giant sharks. Eek! Any idea? The other ghouls and I will be back soon as we figure out how to reach you. XO Drac. Draculaura hit send and was about to ask her ghoul friends a question where her phone beeped. Lagoona wrote back. She shrieked. The ghouls crowded around exactly, but the message Draculaura had received was not what they expected. Message, undeliverable. Your message was not received by the individual intended monster. Oh, I guess I was wrong, Draculaura said, frowning at the screen. Did you get the message when you were reaching out to Lagoona earlier? Asked Cleo. No, I didn't, replied Draculaura, which means her connection at MonsterWeb has gone out. Frankie finished for her. I bet that happens at the time where she lives. All the salt water, high winds, and waves. Poor ghoul, Cleo said. I would have been lost without the monster web while I was stuck in my tomb for a whole millennia. What the heck? We don't have even a minute to lose, announced Draculaura. Come on, ghouls. Let's go. Get Lagoona. Next stop, the library. Frankie cheered. So we've gotten 3 problems, Draculaura began, as the ghouls climbed the spiritual staircase to the 2nd floor. Number 1, we don't know very much about the Great Barrier Reef. True, Cleo replied. Number 2, we have a big, and I mean big, shark problem, Draculaura continued. Very true, Claudine said as she made a face. And number 3, we have a ghoul friend who really shouldn't touch the water, Draculaura finished, glancing at Frankie. Too true, I'm afraid, Frankie said with a sigh. Anything else? Asked Drac. Cleo began. Everyone turned and looked at her. Cleo paused, smiling brightly, and shrugged. I don't think so, she said. But as Cleo looked away, Draculaura noticed there was something a little, off about her eyes. Was she annoyed? Or maybe worried? Draculaura couldn't quite figure it out. This must be so overwhelming, Draculaura thought, just hours ago. Cleo was trapped in her tomb, and now she was out in the monster world, about to set off on her first rescue mission. Total culture shock. How about we start with researching the Great Barrier Reef? Frankie's voice jolted Draculaura out of her thoughts. Definitely, Draculaura replied. We just need to find the right book. Monster High Library was enormous, filled with thousands of books about monsters, history, monster lore, and more. The ghouls split up, drifting throughout the library as they searched for books that would help them. After Draculaura found a book called The Wonders of Down Under, the Great Barrier Reef and Beyond, she noticed Cleo all alone in the corner, and that gave her an idea. Draculaura crossed the room to Claudine. Psst, Claudine, she whispered. What's up? Claudine whispered back as she glanced up from her book. I'm a little worried about Cleo, Draculaura replied. She seems, I don't know, like maybe she feels out of place. That's not good, Claudine said right away. She's one of us now. Monster High should feel like home. That's what I think, Draculaura said. But it is a big change for her. Totally, Claudine agreed. What should we do? I was just thinking maybe she'd feel more better at home if we tried really, really hard to be the best school friends ever, Draculaura said. You got it. Claudine replied. Just then, Frankie's voice rang through the library. Ghouls, I found an atlas, she called. Claudine, Draculaura, and Cleo hurried over to her. Frankie lunged a huge book off the shelf and dropped it on the long wooden table. A cloud of dust rose into the air, sparkling as it caught the light. Draculaura's nose tickled, but a little webby Drax pet spider sneezed so hard he flew halfway across the room. Sorry, Webby, Claudine called over her shoulder. Draculaura leaned over the enormous book and began to turn its yellow pages. This is scary. It's cool, she said. It looks like there's a map of the entire world here. Maybe even a map of where Monster High is located, Frankie said. Check this out, Draculaura exclaimed. This map is of the ocean. The ghouls leaned over the pages to get a closer look. Brilliant swirls of crystal clear water almost hid a incorrect design that looked like a craggy, croaked sculpture. What is that? Asked Cleo. If I'm not mistaken, that's the Great Barrier Reef, Frankie told her. It's totally underwater, Cleo said, sounding surprised. I mean, all of it. Well, not exactly, Frankie replied. There are a lot of small islands on the Great Barrier Reef, but the reef itself is made of coral. So it's all underwater. Listen to this, she said before reading out loud. The coral structures of the Great Barrier Reef provide an ecosystem for thousands of types of sea creatures. There are more than 100 islands in the system, and apparently sea monsters, Draculaura said, thinking of Lagoona. It makes sense, doesn't it? Asked Claudine. Those coral structures could provide a ton of hiding spots for monsters who wanted to avoid normies. But couldn't Lagoona be on one of the islands, too? Cleo asked hopefully. More than 100 islands. That's a lot. I bet monster could definitely hide out there. Maybe, Draculaura said. But the monster mapalogs sent us straight into the sea. That's probably a sign. Cleo's face fell. Oh, right, she said. I forgot about that. So it sounds like we'd better be ready for the watery trip, Frankie said with a worried frown. Hey, Draculaura said. The most important thing is for you to stay safe. I don't want you to get getting dunked into a deep if it's going to make you short out. I don't want that either, Frankie said, but I'm not ready to give up. Not yet. Of course not, Claudine said firmly. Who said anything about giving up? In fact, as Claudine's voice trailed off, her eyes lit up. Clausa, she exclaimed. What? Frankie, Draculaura, and Cleo said all at the same time. But Claudine just smiled mysteriously. You'll see, she said. Then she reached out and grabbed Cleo's hand. Come on, I'm going to need your help. Then without any other word, Claudine and Cleo ran out of the library. Draculaura and Frankie exchanged a look of surprise. What was that about? Frankie finally asked. I have no idea, but I can't wait to find out what Claudine's big idea is, said Draculaura. Me too, Frankie agreed. And I've had a big idea of my own. Tell me everything, Draculaura explained. We don't need to worry about the water just for my sake, Frankie began. We need to worry about it for all of us. I don't think the life vests are enough. Go on, Draculaura encouraged her. Scuba gear, Frankie exclaimed. Combination masks and breathing apparatus so we can explore the ocean floor if we need to. That's fantastic, replied Draculaura. Any chance you can make a shark repellent too? She added, with a hopeful grin. You know, like bug repellent, but for sharks. I can try, Frankie laughed, but I don't think we can make bug spray for sharks. Either way, I'd better get to the lab. I'll come too, Draculaura offered. She tucked the wonders of Down Under, the Great Barrier Reef and beyond, under her arm. The Mad Science Lab at Monster High was Frankie's favorite place in the whole school. Tucked in the deepest underground basement, it was surprisingly high-tech. just the way Frankie liked it. The steel countertops, chrome cabinets, and ultra-bright lights reminded her of the power station where she'd grown up. Best of all, though, the mad science lab was fully stocked with everything the inventor could possibly need. From chemical compounds and rare earth elements to beakers of Bunsen burners. The ghouls were quite as Frankie assembled everything she needed to start work on the Scoo-Boo gear, tubes and valves, heavy-duty sheets of plastic, and some unusual iridium tanks that caught Draculaura's eye. "What are those?" she asked. Frankie didn't look up as she started adjusting the valves on the tank. "It's a new oxygen containment system," she exclaimed. "It doesn't even have a name yet, but it's my theory is correct." "What?" asked Draculaura. Frankie flashed her quick grin. "I don't want to jinx it," she replied. "Let's just wait and see if it works." For a while, the only sound of the lab was Frankie, as she made a deep-sea Scoo-Boo gear at last. She broke the silence by asking Draculaura, "What are you learning about sea creatures?" "Tons of cool stuff," Drac replied. "I mean, the Great Barrier Reef is literally packed with sea creatures of all kinds, and that's what attracts predators like sharks I saw. So it probably was looking for its next meal." Draculaura shrugged at the thought. "But the good news is that the sharks generally don't want to eat monsters, or even normies," she continued. "They prefer smaller fish, or crustaceans, something that can chomp in one bite, and they usually attack only when they're feeling confused or threatened." "Interesting," Frankie replied. "So we should be okay unless the shark gets scared of us." "I think the best advice is to steer clear of them," Draculaura told her, "but that might be easier said than done. We can't exactly control where sharks swim, you know." "True," Frankie laughed. "You know what else we can't control? The weather. It was like a paradise when Claudine and I were there." Draculaura told Frankie, "Clear blue sky, clear blue sea, and a brilliant glittery sun. So we will definitely need to be ready for the heat." Frankie mused. "Do any of those books have a section on weather patterns at the Great Barrier Reef? We could read up so we know what kind of weather to expect." Draculaura flipped to the index. This one does," she replied. "But honestly, there wasn't a single cloud in the sky. Let's hope it stays that way," Frankie said. "But if it doesn't, we'll be ready." Chapter 6. Meanwhile, Claudine and Cleo were hard at work in Monster High Art Studio. A large, airy room was monstrously bright, which made it the perfect place for all sorts of artistic endeavors. From painting to pottery, Claudine had always loved to paint, and her scartage included a lot of artists. In fact, her own mother was Monster High's art teacher, but painting wasn't the reason why Claudine had brought Cleo to the art studio. Cleo watched in confusion as Claudine unfurled several bolts of fabric, shaking her head in disappointment before tossing each one back in a pile. "Ghoul, what could you be looking for?" Cleo finally asked. "The Royal Seamstress never worked this hard, and I have very particular tastes. All of those fabrics look like fantastic to me." Claudine glanced up for a moment. "Oh, they are?" she assured Cleo. "For outfits. It's just I have something different in mind." "Tell me more," Cleo said excitedly. "Starting new trends happen to be talent of mine. Maybe I can help." "I want to design a special suit for Frankie," Claudine explained. "Something completely waterproof so she can help find Lagoona without worrying about all going sparky." "That would be golden," Cleo replied. "But it's not enough for it to be waterproof," Claudine continued. "It has to be positively clawsome, too. I do not want poor Frankie stuck in a equivalent of full-body life vest. They both shuddered at the thought. What can I do to help? Asked Cleo. Claudine crossed the room, rummaging through one of the cabinets and returning with a sketchbook, a set of freshly sharpened color pencils. Do you want to help me sketch some designs? She asked. I'll have my hands full trying to find the right materials to make the pattern. Plus, your style is totally clawsome. If you bring just a smidgen of that style to Frankie's suit, she can look flirtatious and stay safe at the same time. I'm just the ghoul for the job, Cleo replied with a smile. Cleo started sketching while Claudine returned to the pile of fabrics. After a while, Claudine explained, yes, so loud that Cleo jumped. I found it, Claudine cried. She held up a bolt of silvery material that shimmered whenever it caught the light. It's golden, Cleo said approvingly. But is it waterproof? 100% guaranteed, Claudine said, pointing at the label at the end of the bolt. But I think we can do even more than that. Let me guess, Cleo replied. Double layers? Exactly, Claudine said. Plus, I was thinking of crossing the 2 layers of fabric and making them even stronger. It will have to be head to toe, Claudine reminded her. She pressed the sketchbook across the table to Claudine. What do you think about my design? Claudine leaned over and studied Cleo's sketch. A silk suit had a futurist feel that would fit Frankie's high-tech personality perfectly. Oh, that's clawsome, Claudine said approvingly when she noticed the small stiff fins that Cleo had added to the suit's arms and back. If they're good enough for these sharks you speak of, I figure they'll be good for Frankie's suit, Cleo said with a laugh. And if we coat the thread with wax before we sew the suit, even the thread will be waterproof. That will make the seams even stronger and make sure that Frankie stays dry. Ghoul, you're a genius, Claudine explained. Why didn't I think of that? Well, you know, my tomb was accidentally sealed with beeswax for like 1,000 years, Cleo said. I had a lot of time to think about that stuff, like that. But we don't have a lot of time before we need to get to Lagoona, Claudine reminded her. Do you know how to sew? Cleo blinked. Sew, she repeated, like with a needle and thread. Yeah, Claudine said. That's usually how it's done. I wouldn't know, Cleo replied. My seamstress always did the marvelous job, though. Oh, if she were here, we'd be done in no time. Maybe we could make a call. Oh, right, Claudine replied. Well, I'll just get to work on sewing, or maybe I could learn, Cleo suggested a little shyly. Claudine grinned at her ghoul friend. I think you could definitely learn, she replied. Let's do it. For the next hour, Claudine taught Cleo everything she knew about creating a new fashion design, cutting out the pattern, tracing it onto the fabric, pinning the pieces, and finally sewing the pieces together. Then came the fun part. Embellishments. Cleo used a smooth golden disc of beeswax to coat multicolor metallic thread, which the ghouls used to stitch half circles on each inch of the wetsuit. They glimmered and gleamed like fish scales and provided even more protection from the water. At last, Claudine held up the suit. Ta-da! She announced. What do you think? It's royal, Cleo explained. Frankie is going to love it. Come on, let's go give it to her. I can't wait to see her face. Uh-huh, Claudine replied, shaking her head. It's not finished yet. Cleo looked surprised. What do you mean? She asked. It's got 3 layers of waterproofing. It's got functional and fashionable fins. It's even got some creepy cool patterns. What else could we possibly do? A trial run, Claudine announced. She held out the suit to Cleo. Me? Cleo asked in surprise. You want me to try it on? Not just try it on, swim in it, Claudine told her. Cleo stared at her with a blank look. Well, I would, but there's no way the hood would fit over my hair, Claudine explained, shaking her thick purple streaked hair away from her face. And there's no way we can give it to Frankie if we haven't tested it yet. That would be way too big of a risk. Luckily, Monster High has a pool where we could test it out. Follow me. Claudine was so excited to see if the wetsuit worked and that she didn't notice that Cleo was strangely quiet on their walk to Monster High's pool. The aqua-colored water in the pool rippled slightly, casting a flickering reflection on the purple and gray arches that lined the wall. Claudine leaned over and dipped in her pinky finger. Ah, the water feels great, she said. I'm jealous. I'd love to take a dip. Yeah, the pool looks great with all the water and the water, Cleo echoed. She tried to smile but couldn't quite manage it. The locker room is over there, Claudine said. Go ahead and get exchanged. Then you can test out the wetsuit. Maybe we should get Draculaura to test it, Cleo suggested suddenly. I get the sense that Ghoul really loves fashion. She'd be a great model. I'm just, not that, into fashion, Cleo finished. She raised her eyebrows, hopefully wondering if she'd been convincing. Ghoul, you love fashion. You tried to bring 5 golden trucks of custom-made clothing to Monster High, and this is your design, Claudine replied, raising her own eyebrows. Plus, Drac's probably busy with her research. I don't think we should interrupt her, but hurry up and get changed. I can't wait to see if it works. Okay, Cleo said slowly. Then she started walking towards the locker room. She moved as if her feet were encased in cement blocks instead of creep-terrific sandals. Several minutes later, Cleo finally reappeared, wearing the wetsuit. The light reflected off of the saltwater pool made her look like a rare tropical sea beastie. As it flickered off the shimmery threads, Frankie nodded approvingly. Well, the suit looks amazing, she said. Now, let's see if it really works. So, you just want me to, jump in? Cleo asked doubtfully. Sure, Claudine said. Go ahead. The water feels great. Cleo slowly inched closer to the edge of the pool. Maybe I could just put my foot in, she suggested. That will tell us if the fabric really is waterproof. But Claudine shook her head. That will only tell us if it's waterproof on your foot, she replied. What about the rest of Frankie's wetsuit? No, I think you've got to go underwater. You need to be completely submerged. Completely? Cleo gulped. From head to toe, Claudine replied. Okay, Cleo said. She took a deep breath and let the tips of her nose hang over the edge of the pool. She lifted her foot, then started to lower it into the water, slowly, slowly, slowly. I can't wait. I can't, Cleo suddenly cried. She rushed backwards from the pool and perched on the edge of the bench, hugging her knees tightly against her chest. Ghoul, what's wrong? Claudine asked as she hurried to Cleo's side. I can't swim, Cleo cried. Then she buried her face into her hands. Claudine's mouth dropped open in shock. Why didn't you just say anything? She asked. I was embarrassed, Cleo replied, her voice muffled. When everyone was making fun of the life vests earlier, it made me realize how ridiculous it is that I don't know how to swim. Oh no, Claudine replied. I'm sorry, Cleo. We didn't mean to make you feel bad. Honestly, we have no idea that you can't swim. I've lived in the middle of the desert for my entire life, Cleo told her. It was all lounging on the pyramid's sun deck, being fanned by palm leaves, and gazing at the dunes. Even if I had wanted to learn, there wasn't an opportunity. Well, there is now, Claudine declared. There is a pause before Cleo lifted her head. Claudine could see her eyes looking shimmeringly, as they were filled with tears or hope. I've already seen how fast you learn things, Claudine continued. Look how quickly you figured out how to sew. That's harder than swimming. It is, Cleo replied. I think it is, Claudine said. And you know, What? Monster High is pretty much a place to learn new things. Come on. I'll teach you how to swim myself. You will? Cleo asked. Of course, like I told Draculaura when we went to the Great Barrier Reef. I've been doggy paddling since I was a pup, Claudine said. She reached out and took hold of Cleo's hand, then pulled Cleo to her feet. Don't go anywhere, Claudine continued. I'm going to get my swimsuit, and then we'll both take a plunge. You'll be swimming before you know it. And that is the end of Chapter 6, guys. I will see you guys in Chapter 7 in the next video.